And it says, verse 19, and Leah conceived again and bare Jacob the sixth son. And Leah said, God hath endued me with a good dowry. Now will my husband dwell with me, because I have borne him 6 sons. And she called his name Zebulun. So his name means dwelling or safety. And so she's reading into that and saying that from this point on, Jacob's just going to stay with me and forget about Rachel. Now that, of course, isn't true, because he obviously goes back to be with Rachel because she has 2 kids. But in the end, when it all comes to the end of his life, when Jacob is buried, he's not buried by Rachel. Even though Rachel was his beloved, he was buried by Leah. Which shows you at the end of Jacob's life, he finally bowed to the responsibility of being the firstborn. He fought that all his life. Lied to his daddy about him being Esau, all that, trading the birthright, all that. And so, about lost my balance. So Zebulun is the 6th son of Leah. He is the 10th son of Jacob, with Joseph and Benjamin to come. Look at Genesis 49, verse 13. And have you noticed how this is really hopped around as far as how the Lord, through Jacob, it's not by birth order that he talks to these boys. He starts out that way. It's Reuben in verse 3, and then it's Simeon and Levi in verse 5, and then it's Judah in verse 8 through 12. So that's these first 4 sons in birth order. But then he goes to Zebulun, verse 13. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships. In his border shall be called Zidon. So he's the 5th mention in Moses, or in Jacob's discussion here of the prophecies to come. And this has to be somewhat of a prophecy, because if you look at that carefully, it's immediately going to raise a question in your mind, which it does for all Bible teachers and Bible students, is look at the map. Now that's not an exact map, but look at the map and show me where the sea is. His dwelling shall be on the sea. Now there might be in some way of looking at some maps that, and you can look them up yourself to get, and I suggest you do, rather than looking at this and go, man, that's really good, because it's really not good. But it illustrates what we're talking about. And if you go and look at the actual map, Zebulun is actually a little more in line geographically with how Asher looks, and I've got it just a little circle. But there's a little part here that you might make an argument for Zebulun that it's on the sea, but I can't see it. It gets real thin over here between Zebulun and Asher, but I can't see that he dwells on the sea. So what does that mean? Is Jacob wrong? And of course we know the answer to that, right? Is the Bible wrong? No, you give God the benefit of the doubt every time. If you read that and become a judge of God and say, well, there's proof the Bible's wrong, then you're just a fool. Because God's always right. So if you read that and you don't understand it, you just bow your will and bow your mind and bow your intellect and say, well, I may not be able to see it, but that's what God says and that's what I believe. Because it goes way beyond this layout here. Now, some who are skeptics will say, well, Jacob was making that discussion, but he didn't have any idea how it was going to turn out in Joshua, which is just a cop-out. Because that's saying Jacob was wrong. When Jacob was speaking by the word of the Lord, and this is the inspired scripture, so everything Jacob says is a prophecy. Don't forget what it says in the first verse, the last 4 words. In the last days. In the last days. It's talking way beyond this. It's talking about the future, and it's a future that we have not experienced yet. Although we may be in the last days, and Israel is reestablished in the land of Israel since 1948, it's not divided up like this because nobody in Israel knows what their genealogy is. Now that's going to be figured out at some point. We know from Revelation chapter 7, correct? Because there's going to be 12,000 marked from each tribe. Well, nobody knows what tribe they're from now. You walk up to a Jew and say, what tribe are you from? He might guess, but the genealogies have been lost. There's no proof. But the proof is there. We just don't know where it is. And it may not be, it's certainly not revealed yet. But one day it will be. And then perhaps there'll be a drawing out in that time. It could even reach into the millennium where this is spoken of. But the most likely scenario for understanding this is over in Kings, where Solomon's kingdom spreads. It's not just this little territory here. It spreads. One of the greatest kingdoms that ever reigned, like Rome, like Alexander the Great in Greece. Solomon had that first great kingdom, and the land mass that he had was great. So most likely it comes to pass there, but I would even pass it on even further to the millennium. It does not disturb me at all, that verse. It doesn't disturb me at all. Because I work over here and say, well, it's landlocked. Okay. Here's just an opportunity for me to have faith that God knows what he's saying and knows what he's doing. It's not an evidence of a mistake. All right? So we give God the benefit of the doubt. So now let's go forward and go to Deuteronomy, as our usual trek is. Deuteronomy 33. You should be getting used to this now. I think this is the 10th time we've done this, except Simeon. Simeon's left out. But in Deuteronomy 33, 18 and 19, Moses gives Zebulun a couple of verses. Verse 18 of Zebulun, he said, rejoice, Zebulun, in thy going out, and Issachar in thy tents. They shall call the people unto the mountain. There they shall offer sacrifices of righteousness. For they shall suck out of the abundance of the seas and of the treasures hid in the sand. Now here's the thing about these two guys, Asher and Zebulun. They're like twins. They are connected together whenever they are Issachar and Zebulun are connected together like twins. When you see one, then you usually see the other in some way connected by that. So there you see that in verse 18. There's Zebulun and there is Issachar. And so there's that connection. Of course, Issachar is here, and Issachar is connected to the Sea of Galilee, and we'll get into that a little bit more important of how important the Sea of Galilee is. So there again is another prophecy that there's going to be something connected with the sea that's going to bless Zebulun, and I think we'll see what that is before the time is over tonight. Now let's go to Judges chapter 1. And we begin to draw out here some character lessons for us, and that's what we're always looking for, is how can these things help us? By the way, 46 times in the Bible the term Zebulun occurs. Sometimes Zebulun is with an O here instead of a U, and that's always in the New Testament. So Old Testament is Zebulun, in the New Testament it's Zebulon, but it's the same person. Just like we saw with Asher and Aser and Judah and Judas, same thing, back and forth. So you get to the New Testament, sometimes the spelling's a little different. That's the Hebrew and the Greek is all that is. So now we look at Judges chapter 1, verse 30. Neither did Zebulun drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Naphtali, but the Canaanites dwelt among them and became tributaries. So here he can't drive out the Canaanites out of the land. But rather than just surrendering to them, and we've talked about that before, that's not the first tribe that can't drive out the Canaanites. Even Judah has trouble with it. But what what Zebulun does is he makes these who they can't drive out to become servants. So they're going to be bearers of water and bearers of stones and just become servants. Whatever the tribe needs to be done, those Canaanites would do, but they are still thorns in their side. So the first lesson we learn from Zebulun for us is, first of all, opportunity. Here you have opportunity. You are given a possession. You are given a place to live. I like what Matthew Henry said. I won't take this as my own. He said, God appoints our habitation, but we're left up to improve it. So God gives you a body. You're fearfully and wonderfully made. And God made you the way he made you. Now, what have you done with the inhabitant? What have you done with this body? That's the question. How have you treated it, the temple of God? And many times, I'll put my first up as, I'll be the first volunteer. Many times what happens to us in life, you know why I had to have a liver transplant? Because about 1995, my doctor told me to lose 20 pounds. And I said, who needs to lose 20 pounds? Yeah, that's a great idea. I'll get right on that. And you know what he told me in 96, and 97, and 2000, and 2010? It might have become at that point 25 pounds or 30 pounds. And then what happens? Liver goes bad. Fatty liver disease. Told about it in 1995. 1 in 10 people, because of fatty liver disease, develop cirrhosis of the liver. Because anytime you think, anybody says, oh, well, you have cirrhosis of the liver, you know what they think? Because that's 90% of the people. So I stumble out here and you think, probably he's been drinking a little tonight. But I put myself out first. We have an opportunity. We are given possessions. Children, houses, lands, possessions, opportunities, education, whatever you want to say. Eyesight, hearing, health, hair, whatever God's given you, it's an opportunity. Now, you know what one guy did with his opportunity? He went out and he doubled it. He had 5 talents, and when the Lord came back, he had 10. But you know what one guy did? He buried it. Don't bury your talents. If you can sing, sing. If you can teach, teach. If you can organize, organize. If you can administrate, administrate. If you can pray, pray. Whatever God's given you as an ability, don't bury that thing, because what happened to that guy? He had to take what he had and give it to the guy who had 10. So that's our first lesson. Opportunity, what do you do with it? He's given land, what do you do with it? He didn't drive out the inhabitants. But it's not a sad story. Like many, and like us, all of us have bones in our graveyard. But look what he does going forward. Look at Judges chapter 5, and this again takes us to the same story we've looked at every week. And that's chapter 4, and Deborah and Balak and their defeat of Sisera, which took place right here between Zebulun and Issachar. This is the valley of Jezreel. And so that battle takes place. That's such an important battle in history that God just keeps bringing up for us what these tribes did. It's on the record. You want another lesson from Zebulun and any of the tribes? It's on the record. You know what your life is? It's on the record. And the blessing we have is we can still add to the record. We hope we add to the record in a good way and don't continue to do something in a negative way. But here we are in the valley of Jezreel, and Judges chapter 5 verse 14 says this. Just look at the end of the verse. And out of Zebulun they that handled the pen of the writer. So Zebulun were writers. They wrote down records, which is always important to do. How important is a record? How important it is to keep history? Well, this book, imagine you didn't have any writers. Imagine if you didn't have any writers in history. I love reading history. So I'm glad we got writers, because we would lose history. We would lose records. And these guys were writers. Then look at chapter 5, verse 18. I got a little personal there, apologize. Verse 18, Zebulun and Naphtali were people that jeopardized their lives unto death in the high places of the field. So there is Zebulun and Naphtali mentioned again. Partners in war, partners in business, and they jeopardized their lives. I'm not going to go here. This is, again, we've been over this time and time again. Judges chapter 6 is the story of Gideon. And when Gideon went out to battle, there's Zebulun right there with them. So he starts out here not so good in Judges 1, but by Judges 5, he's got his ground. And he's gone out to war. Then you come to 1 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 33. Let's turn there. You ought to put your eyes on this rather than what I've just written on the board. 1 Chronicles 12:33. Of Zebulun, such as went forth to battle, expert in war with all instruments of war, 50,000 which could keep rank, they were not of double heart. Now you want to pray some things for yourself? Right there's something. Lord, help me not to be double-hearted. I don't want to be double-hearted. I don't want to be double-minded. Because a double-minded man is, you know that verse? A double-minded man is unstable in all his ways. I don't want to be double-minded. And what's double-hearted? What do you think that means? Doesn't that mean that I've got a little bit of affection for over here, and I've got a little bit affection over here, and the two are contrary to one another, and they fight against one another, and that gets just right where we live, don't we? Because we have the flesh and we have the spirit. And if we aren't careful, we'll get so affected, such affection for the things of the flesh, that the things of the spirit will die on the vine. But the more we give attention to the spiritual things, then that flesh dies on the vine. So if I feed the flesh and feed the flesh and feed the flesh and feed the flesh, he's going to become a mighty man, hard to drive out. But if I feed the Spirit and feed the Spirit and feed the Spirit, then he's going to be the one to be able to overcome the flesh. It's what we feed ourselves. But he was not double-hearted. I love that. An expert in war and all instruments of battle, so he could handle any kind of instrument of war that needed to be done. That's the kind of guy. It's like a utility player in baseball. He can play any position. Need him at second base, he can play second base. Need him at third base, he can play third base. Hey, I need you to go to center field. I can play center field. Same guy. How invaluable to the team. You got somebody go down that's shooting this particular or using this particular instrument. He goes down, Zebulun step in and say, I can do that. Experts at war. How do you become an expert at anything? Practice, 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 practice. And if you can handle any instrument, that means I'm an expert. You know what I want to become an expert at? Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. I'm not. I'm not an expert. Numbers, Deuteronomy. There's 66 instruments. I would like to become an expert at all of them. Which one are you an expert at? I don't feel like I'm an expert at any of them. But you know what I'm going to keep doing? I'm going to keep handling the weapon. And I'm going to try and come better. Because there's nothing more frustrating to me, personally, inwardly, I never show it, when someone asks me a question and I know it's in the Bible, but I don't know where it is. And I have to use some tool to try to help me get it, help me get to the point where I can handle it like an expert. That's my prayer. Then 2 Chronicles chapter 30. 2 Chronicles chapter 30. No, that can't be right. There's no 30. There it is. 2 Chronicles chapter 30. I was about to slip up and say there's not 30 chapters, but that's First Chronicles. See how great an expert I am? Chapter 30, verse 18. Second Chronicles, chapter 30, verse 18. And this is, we don't have to look at that. This is the same place that we've looked at before with the other tribes where Hezekiah is having this revival. Remember, down in Judah, these are all northern tribes under the evil kings, and Hezekiah has a revival, and he is among one of the tribes that goes down. Even though people are mocking them and making fun of them for going, they still go and worship the Lord and humble themselves before the Lord. So that's another lesson from Zebulun, is humility. Let's humble ourselves. We looked at this chapter and verse in an earlier lesson. Let's go back to Isaiah chapter 9, and we'll build on it a little bit tonight from what we've said before. And you can see we're almost done with this study, so it'll be a short one tonight. Isaiah chapter 9, verse 1. Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali. Well, there they are again. Zebulun and Naphtali. And afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan in Galilee and the nations. So here's Galilee, this little here, Galilee. This is the Sea of Galilee here. This is all the nation of Galilee I've got right here. So there's Galilee. And verse 2, the people that walked in darkness have seen a great light. They that dwell in the land of the shadow of death, upon them hath the light shined. Now let's turn to Matthew chapter 4, and we'll see this came to pass. We've already looked at this with Naphtali, but let's look at it again. And then I'll try to show you a little bit about what's here. Verse 12, now when Jesus had heard that John was cast into prison, he departed into Galilee. Now Jerusalem on this map is down here, way down here in the south. And this is, so here we are. Jerusalem is down here. And so the Lord departs after he's heard all this, because it's in Jerusalem where John is preaching against what's going on with Herod and his wife and marrying his brother's wife, and he's thrown into prison, eventually gets his head cut off, and it's also where Jesus is going to die. So what the Lord does, and you can find many great maps showing you the walks of Jesus Christ, but he goes all the way up here to Galilee. I've always wondered, and there's no way to figure it out till we get to heaven, but one thing I want to know is how many miles Jesus walked while he was on this earth. He had to spend days and days of those 1,260 days. How many days of those did he spend walking? You all walk, right? You walk? How long does it take you to walk a mile? Roughly. 8 minutes, 9 minutes? 18 minutes? If you walk an 8-minute mile, that'd be really fast. I used to be able to get in I could walk 4 miles in an hour, but that's hoofing it. That's every 15 minutes. So if you're walking at 3 miles an hour, how long would it take you to get to the interstate? How long would it take you to get to Nashville if you're walking 3 miles an hour? And you're not going to be able to keep that pace up. Especially you got a crowd behind you. 12 men, women, food, and he's walking. Well, he couldn't take an Uber. He had to walk everywhere he went. I think that's overlooked in Jesus' ministry. We just read it and go, zip, zip, there he is, zip, there he is. And he walked every mile. Not only did he walk up here, he died down here. You know what he did? He walked back. because he said, I must go here. Well, the reason he had to go there is he got work to do. And Matthew chapter 4, verse 13, and leaving Nazareth, and here is Nazareth. So here is Nazareth. He's born in Bethlehem down here. Bethlehem is down below Jerusalem. But Jesus Christ is right here in Nazareth. Because remember, he goes down to Egypt, gets warned that he can't go back to Bethlehem, the place of his birth. He's got to get out of Egypt and he's got to go to Nazareth, and that's where he grows up. And so he spends his whole time here in Nazareth, in this area. And these are, 30 years? 30 years here. And now his ministry's begun. Actually, it's 29 and a half if we're going to be accurate. 29 and a half years he spends right there. One time when he's 12 years old, he's down here, right? So he's walking even during his childhood, obviously. This is a big trip to go to Jerusalem. They do it once a year. And he's there for every Passover in those 3.5 years. Last one he dies. So he leaves here and he goes here. And this is the Sea of Galilee, by the way. All right, let's see what it says. Leaving Nazareth, he came and dwelt in Capernaum. There's Capernaum. It's right on the sea. Beautiful place. That's where he goes. Which is upon the sea coast, the borders Zebulun. It borders, here's the Sea of Galilee. So it borders Zebulun and Naphtali. So you know this has to go this way somehow. Because it says Zebulun and Naphtali are on the sea. And so maybe over there in Genesis where it's talking about, I look at the maps and it doesn't really have it on the Sea of Galilee. It's going by Joshua 19. So anyway, Zebulun is on the Sea of Galilee, which may explain, okay, he's on the ships. And of course the Sea of Galilee is huge. Big storms will come across it. Ships have sunk in Lake Michigan. Well, it's just a lake. Yeah, but you get a lake big enough, it's like the ocean. And it can destroy ships and lost lives, as happened many times. The Fitzgerald, what was it? Edmund Fitzgerald. Okay. So here's Jesus. He comes up to Capernaum, which is on the Sea of Galilee. It borders Zebulun and Naphtali, that it might be fulfilled, which was prophesied by Isaiah the prophet. And we just read that in Isaiah 9, verse 16. The people which sat in darkness saw great light. To them which sat in the region shadow of death, light is sprung up. From that time, Jesus began to preach and say, repent, for the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And you look at the next verse, and he's walking by the Sea of Galilee, and he sees two guys out here fishing. And he says, follow me. Follow me. Now this gives you a little bit, just a small bit of a view, because he goes over to Bethesda and he goes over to Gennesaret. Gennesaret isn't far from Capernaum. That's where he cast that guy out in Mark 5, cast out all the demons. That's there. So 11 of 12 disciples come from right here. Would you like to guess which one doesn't? Judas Iscariot didn't come from there. So these guys, now think about it. He's 29. They're in business. James and John are in business with their father. How old are they? You know, they're probably young 20s. Peter's married, but that doesn't mean anything. They get married young and early. Mother-in-law is living with them. So he's the only one married among the group. So these guys could be 18, 19, 20. And Jesus is 29, so maybe, of course they could be older, I'm just guessing. But Jesus is 29 years old. I'm putting this all together. Don't read verse 18 like that's the first time he's ever seen Peter. They grew up in the same area. Right here's Nazareth. Right here's Capernaum. And Jesus is all over Galilee in his childhood. Don't you know? I mean, he was a carpenter, but don't you know he'd like to go fishing? And learn fishing? This is the sea he walked on, by the way. So you have all that going on. That's what I wanted you to see, is Zebulun and Naphtali are so blessed because the heartbeat of God's ministry is right here. It's where it started. It's where he drew his men and said, come follow me. And I don't have any proof in the scripture. It's just logic and looking at the map. He called people he knew and chose them because he'd grown up with them and watched them. Except one. Old Judas Iscariot from Carioth. That's an interesting study too, to chase that down. Okay, that gives you the lesson tonight.